Eh.
All right, I think we are going. Sadly, it is just YouTube because I have been working for a major part of the day on trying to get multi-streaming working again, and it's just not. So apologies to everyone who ordinarily watches on Odyssey or Rumble. It's just going to be YouTube for the second month in a row.
Right.
And I don't get it because that's like the easiest thing in the world to do. All you do is send out like 2 more copies of the RTMP stream. Yeah, it takes more bandwidth, but I got the bandwidth. Hello, SKM. And how you doing, Chris?
Well, apart from the soft muscle tissue damage I told you about, I'm okay.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this. I've had a lot to learn about this for obvious reasons. For soft tissue damage, they say it can take up to 9 weeks to heal.
Yeah,
So,
and
I
it
mean, it's
hurts
not
like
just
hell.
something you can just walk off or just wait. It hurts for a long time.
Mm.
I have these attacks, I guess, for lack of a better word, of breakthrough pain. And the worst is I don't know I don't know the muscle names. It's either the pectorals or whichever ones are under that go around to the side on your rib cage, and then the ones on the back coming off under your shoulder blade and coming around to the side. And when it hits on those, it just hits hard, and I have trouble breathing, and it feels like someone is stabbing my lungs. So,
Oh yeah, I felt like that these past couple weeks too. Like there's been some nights where, like no joke, I've literally been stressed out because I'm afraid, like, am I having a heart attack? Can I not sleep? And yeah, when I went to I went to the ER. When I went to the ER to look it out, I had to stay there for most of the morning because initially I was gonna go in there. I was gonna think, okay, maybe they'll give me a chest X-ray, see what's going on. But the moment I mentioned I was in pain and I mentioned my chest, they took me back and
oh
hooked
yeah,
me up, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? And they explained, no, it's okay. It's just that anytime someone comes in and they mention chest pain, no matter which side it's on, we take it very
yep.
seriously.
Oh yeah. They're hooking you up to a heart monitor.
Yep.
They do not
Yeah, that's
mess
what they
around
did.
with
They
that.
hooked Yeah, they hooked me up to a heart monitor, and when my heart was confirmed, they're like, "Okay, your heart's all confirmed. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a blood sample and we're gonna test to see if you have a blood clot, because that was the second thing they were concerned about with the pain."
Yeah.
Which I don't blame them, because I've heard blood clots, they can be silent killers.
Oh yeah, they can do all sorts of damage. They can get into your brain and cause permanent brain damage. They can disable a limb. They can do all sorts of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I don't want to Google it too much because I'm a hypochondriac. Yeah, but unlike heart attacks, strokes, they can literally happen at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. So, SKM is asking first question: what is your opinion of Trump withholding aid from California unless certain conditions are met, like voter ID? I'm from Western North Carolina, and it's hard to feel sympathetic right now,
Yeah.
especially since what we keep being told and what we're basically bullied with the whole time is, no, we have to do that so the richer states can pay for the poorer states. It ends up being the other way around, doesn't it? California is like the richest state in the country. Why do they need federal funds
Exactly.
for stuff like that? Especially considering they were the ones who screwed up.
Yep. I still can't believe a lot of people aren't connecting the dots to figure it out, saying, why are all these wildfires occurring in California but not in other places that are just as dry and arid?
Or even places in California that are just private forests, like owned by paper companies or something.
Yep. Yeah, speaking of forests and all that, and speaking for the trees, that's why I hate the book, and the TV short, The Lorax. It lied to me.
My opinion is for the best because seeing how Cali handles money, they'll probably squander or possibly even launder it. Yeah, it really sounds like there's a lot of corruption
Yeah,
going on in
yeah.
California. When you look at how much they're raking in from the taxpayers, and how little the taxpayers are actually getting, and how they've got water shortages and power shortages and stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy.
And I mean, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump is doing right now, but one thing that does make me kind of facepalm and laugh are the people that are saying what Donald Trump is doing is unconstitutional. And I'm like, everything he's doing, his executive orders are within the executive branch of the government. So yes, he is in constitutional authority. Like you
Well,
said, everyone
it's
that's
like
saying,
they're
well, no,
coming out and admitting that they want the administrative state to be a fourth branch that's like separate from all the others.
oh they're like, oh no, it's like these secretary directors should have their own sovereignty and they should have like this and that, and like that's in complete violation of the separation of powers, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why we have these secretaries and all that is not because we need a magical fourth term of government. It's because we acknowledge that the president can't be everywhere all at once, and their job is just to take care of it if the president is engaged with another action that he can't attend to it.
All you need to do is read the very first sentence of Article 2 of the Constitution, which says
Hmm.
that the executive power is vested in a president of the United States.
Yeah.
That's
So
it.
if anything,
It's all him. He
so
is the executive branch.
yeah. So if anything, all these calls, you know, to have Congress or the Supreme Court stop in the way, that's actually in violation of the Constitution because as long as his executive orders only affect the executive branch, he can do it, people.
Yeah, and that's what Marbury v. Madison said. And check out, there's a recent video from 10th Amendment Center, which is a great channel. Subscribe if you're not already. But he just did this. I mean, you know, he always brings the receipts and just goes over everything thoroughly. But about Marbury versus Madison and the myths that people talk about it, like how it supposedly made the Supreme Court the sole arbiter of what's constitutional, and no, it didn't.
Hmm.
And how
You know,
it established for the first time that courts got to, you know, answer constitutional questions. No, you go all the way back to the ratification debates, the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers. They're all saying, yeah, judicial review is a thing. They have to step in if something's unconstitutional. Wasn't a new thing. So many myths about that. But if you actually read Marbury v. Madison, then you'll see it does a really good job of confirming the separation of powers that the framers talked about, and how if it's something like, hey, I'm the president and I want my people to send me 5 bullet points saying what they did this week, then they should just do that instead of having their union go whining to the courts. Courts shouldn't have anything to say about that. That's totally internal to the executive branch.
Yeah, speaking of separation of powers, out of curiosity, I looked this up one time because I was having a discussion about separation of powers, and you know, we all know that there's an amendment, you know, that says Congress has to approve of military action or declare war, so we don't end up with a Vietnam situation. And it got me wondering, well, what would happen if Congress declares war, but the president doesn't want war? Like, what if Congress declares war on Canada, but the president thinks that's a bad idea? Can he refuse to call in the troops? And apparently, yes, he can.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what James K. Polk did.
Yeah.
Congress declared war on Canada, and he said, no, I think I'm going to go talk to them.
Mm.
And that established the Canadian border at the 39th parallel.
Yeah, that's a funny thing about Canadian history is that, you know, Canada throughout multiple points throughout its history, it almost was a state.
Or was almost completely at war with the United States.
Yeah. Well, that was back when, you know, there was still, you know, tensions between the United States and Great Britain, and that's basically what Canada was. It was a way for the UK and the US to duke it out until eventually, like in the 1830s, when they're like, okay, you know what? Let's forget about it. The thing that happened, the War of 1812, the American Revolution, that's in the past. Let's just forget about it and become trade partners.
I forget what it was, though. There was something, though, in the Carter administration where he almost screwed up badly enough that Canada was starting to talk war. I think it wasn't really until the 90s with NAFTA where you get the United States and Canada basically acting as all one economy.
Mm.
But no, Trump's point about the Canada being a 51st state is that Canada is getting a lot more in subsidies from the federal government than a lot of states are. And he is like, why are we doing that? They're a different country.
Yeah, there's actually one Canadian politician, and from what I understand, he doesn't like Trump, but he's brought that up. He said, look, people, if we're scared of Trump and all that, maybe we gotta do something about our own country and allow people. One of the reasons why Canada is so economically dependent on the UK and the US is because they basically destroyed their own market through a quasi socialist state.
Yeah, I mean, with all of the resources they have, they should be. I
Yeah.
mean, they're definitely one of the biggest exporters of oil and petroleum, and that
Oh
they
yeah,
should
they
be
have
able to
been.
hold their own.
Yeah, that's what I forgot who it was. It was like Pierre someone. Yeah, he said, listen, if we didn't have all these ridiculous rules and regulations, we wouldn't be so dependent on the US and UK, and we wouldn't have to worry about Trump threatening to annex us.
Yes, Zen, you must have missed the first thing I was talking about when we first got on, but it's not OBS itself, it's that multicast plugin that all of a sudden has just refused to to want to turn on and start working. I can't even get the dock up for it. And I have no idea why. And I also don't know why this isn't just a thing that OBS just can't do. Because it's really simple. You just send the RTMP stream to more than one URL at the same time. So you just have it send it to the three streaming URLs, and yeah, it triples your bandwidth, but I got the bandwidth.
Mm,
Are older
mm.
model appliances more durable? Kind of depends on what you mean. If you're talking in real terms, of what you actually pay for them, no, you can get much more durable appliances for the price today than you could in the past. What you also have, though, is a lot of cheaper appliances. And the cheaper appliances, of course, you can't really expect those to last quite as long. So, I mean, do you want a microwave that is going to last you 5 years and then you get a new one? Or do you want to spend the money and get one that is really just going to last you for 20 years or whatever?
Mm. Speaking of money, my mom was complaining, she was ranting and saying, "Well, if Trump's elected now, how come prices haven't gone down?" And I didn't want to say anything because I don't want to get her riled up. But I'm like, well, even if Trump does carry through with, all those economic reforms, it's still going to take a while.
Well, and also getting inflation down doesn't get prices down. It just stops them from going up any higher.
Yeah, and that's another thing too I hate about it when people say, oh, we tried, free markets, somewhere here and it failed because it caused all this economic misery and all that. And many economists have said, yeah, there is going to be a little bit what I like to call, withdrawal, you know, withdrawal symptoms, kind of like with a drug addict, there's going to be some of those symptoms, but you got to tough it through.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen that you have like a recession for like 6 months to a year. And then after that, you
Yeah.
start seeing a lot of gains.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem is, and I've seen this with a lot of economics videos, is that a lot of politicians they treat economic recessions as if they're an inherently bad thing, whereas most economists say that while they're not desirable, they're going to happen from time to time, and they're kind of an essential part of the creative destruction of the market.
Well, it's because you're doing too many things over here and not enough things over here. And so we need to
Mm.
get the resources moved from one place to another. And that takes a little bit of time. And while you're doing that, people are losing their jobs and they don't quite have the new jobs made yet. And that's what a recession is.
And, unfortunately, there have been times throughout history when America was a much more free market where, unfortunately, that was necessary. But, that's just it. Sometimes, it's just something you got to tough through. But governments act like no, recessions are something that must be avoided at all costs. But we all see what happens when they try to prevent a recession at all costs.
Oh, you want to talk about those $5,000 Doge checks? SKM just bought those up. You know, would it cause inflation? Because people are thinking of like, oh, the COVID checks, you know, they caused a lot of inflation because you sent those out to everyone. But if you're getting checks based off of budget cuts, there's no reason why that would happen. And Larkin Rose put out a video where he made the argument that, yeah, that's kind of the case, but by the time the check goes out, government still already spent the money they have. And so all that money they saved isn't just sitting in a vault to send out. They've still got to raise the revenues again to send out the checks. And I'm thinking, okay, I see his point, but couldn't you make exactly the same argument about tax refunds? Because when they send you your tax refund back, they haven't been kind of saving up your money ever since it was withheld from your paycheck to send it back to you. They've been spending it. And so your tax refund is going to come from new revenues coming in or new debt. So if these Doge checks are inflationary, then aren't tax refunds inflationary by the same token, by the same idea?
Yeah, there's also talks about getting rid of the IRS, and I'm not gonna lie, as much as I would love to get rid of the IRS, the sad reality is that that's gonna be a tough nut to crack, because I don't think there's not much, Trump, within his constitutional authority can do about them, because in order to get rid of the IRS, it's gonna take an act of Congress, and we all know Congress isn't gonna get rid of the IRS. Even the Republicans don't want to get rid of it within Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, the problem is that in order to get rid of the IRS, we have to get rid of the revenue tax, and unfortunately, that was one of those bad amendments that made it through the process.
What's more unfair, property or income taxes? Don't ask me right now, because I had to pay $2,000 in property taxes for last
Yeah,
year.
that's like that. Yeah, asking which is more unfair, property tax or income tax. That's like asking which STD is worse, chlamydia or gonorrhea.
I mean, my house is paid off. I don't have a mortgage on it anymore. I supposedly own it, but yet I've got to pay basically the equivalent in rent payments, maybe not quite, to the government just in the property taxes.
Reminds me of that.
If you're complaining about the rents you're paying to your landlord, I wouldn't be at all surprised if half of your rent money the landlord is turning around and paying in taxes.
Oh yeah, that's why I posted it in the fail quotes. But there's that one YouTuber where he does some good videos where basically he tries to debunk myths about the modern generation, how like the older generation saying, oh, modern generation is lazy and all that, and he tries to debunk that. But then he poops his pants because he makes videos where he says the reason why the younger generation can't afford anything is because we're a renter economy and not a producer economy. And he's saying we need to do things like increase wages with inflation, this and that. And I'm just like, dude, that's gonna make the problem 100 times worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, literally Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic tried adjusting wages to inflation. You know what that resulted in? Everyone becoming millionaires, and their millions of dollars are useless. Like, literally, go to Zimbabwe. Everyone there's a millionaire/billionaire. Yet how come they don't have mansions? Because they're billions of dollars they have. It's worthless.
Yeah. Would UBI or a negative income tax be a lesser evil to the modern welfare state? Well, it wouldn't be as wasteful, but that's also why they actually didn't want to do it when this was even back in the 70s when Milton Friedman was pushing it around. Not because he seriously thought that negative income tax was good, but it was just better than, what was there. And he just wanted to see if he could get some reforms through. And it turns out you have a lot of people who are working in the Social Security Administration, in Medicare, in all these other places who are all about the job security. They'll tell you it's about helping people and feeding the poor and taking care of the elderly. It's not. because the negative income tax would have done that. Would have done that a lot better. And yet they fought it tooth and nail.
Yeah, it's one thing that would definitely fix a lot of the corruption going on within our federal government, but unfortunately, it's a solution that's going to require a massive societal change in America to get rid of. We got to get rid of the 17th Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, because of the democracy cult, people are like, "Oh, but if you do that, that means people can't vote for senators anymore. Why are you against democracy?" And it's like that's not what senators were supposed to be. You vote for the representatives, while the Senate is was supposed to be appointed by state officials.
Majority of the cost of a house are the price of land, permitting, inspection, zoning, and taxes. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yep.
Because upkeep and maintenance is just relatively low.
Oh, yeah. Zoning laws. That's another thing nobody wants to talk about.
When zoning can actually be like 70 to 80% of the price of a parcel of land when you compare it to a similar parcel in an area that doesn't have zoning.
Yeah. And let's be real here, people. Zoning was basically in a lot of the complaints that some of these people have, with of where white people live and black people live, that whole ethnic thing. It's because of zoning.
Yep. That's why you
Yeah.
have the wrong side of the tracks.
Yep.
Because they would set the zoning lines along at the railroad tracks and
Yeah, because like that's like this isn't what they literally say, but some of the first zoning laws were were more or less just a racist mayor saying, okay, all Americans who are of white Anglo-Saxon British ancestry, you get to live in these nice, beautiful lands. Blacks, immigrants, and filthy Catholics and Jews, you stay over there in the poor area.
yeah, I mean, SKM and HVAC system will set you back, but not all that much. I just had mine replaced a couple of years ago. And get this, I mean, it's pretty much the reason why I'm using a lot less power. And even when you compare it to this time last year when I still had the new HVAC system, but even now, just with the advanced way we're able to set controls and everything, my power usage last month was 15% less than it was the previous January. And yet I still paid more on my power bill.
Alden Day asks, why do Republican women seem to be the most low-key anti-capitalist in the whole party? Well, because you got to face the facts. The Republican Party isn't a pro-capitalist party.
It's not.
I consider the GOP a diet populist party.
Well, it's more populist now that Trump has gotten in.
Yeah.
But before Trump, they paid lip service to the populists. But they were establishment status quo party, just like the Democrats.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the only real difference, is that the Democrats, you haven't really had this big push for a populist movement, which a lot of people were predicting, back when the so-called squad got in, AOC and all those others. But guess what? They ended up being just as pro-establishment as the rest.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's actually why a lot of people seem to always go and they say, why does the Republican Party seem to be seem to flip flop and all that, and they constantly change their opinions. And I'm like, well, that's because they're for the most part a populist party, and that means they go for whatever the people want.
Yeah, there is no reason why a 1,400 square foot home should be $1 million. That is ridiculous. You go up to where $1 million homes are, and they've got like multiple buildings with walkways between them, and it's like really nice, and it just multiple stories and foyers, and like just really nice. I got a 2,000 square foot home. It is not worth $1 million. It's not even worth the 300,000 the county says it is, which is why my property taxes are so high. That's the thing. You have a housing crash and housing prices go down, but guess what? When they do their reappraisal, they still bump up all the prices. Oh, look, I guess you got to pay more property taxes because your home's worth more. It's like, there's no way it would sell for that.
By the way, it's one cringy. Speaking of prices and boomers law, it's one cringy thing I heard, and this actually came from an older boomer, not an entitled newer generation. But it's really stupid. They say the reason everything's becoming so expensive and all that, and our economy's failing is because we're no longer a manufacturing economy. We're a service economy. Uh, if you're a capitalist economy, everything is a service economy. Like when I ask people about that, they're like, "Well, you see, we're making things like we're providing things like fast food and health insurance and all that, but we're not manufacturing cars anymore." And I'm like, "Yeah, back in the day, you really think people were manufacturing cars and steel and all that, and they were just putting it all in a large warehouse? No, you were
Hey,
building it
we
with the
got
intent."
the we got the number one car manufacturer in the world here.
Yeah. But still, the point I'm trying to make is that, people don't manufacture cars or steel, for their own good. They do it because someone's paying them to do it. And how's
Right.
that not a how's that not a customer service economy?
Yeah, they're doing it for someone else.
Yeah.
They're
I
not
mean,
doing it
as
because
many
they
people.
want to drive the cars themselves. They do it to sell to other people.
Yeah, I mean, hell, a lot of
And I mean,
car manu.
Tesla has just been such a nice big debunking of all that
Yeah.
because they're one of the biggest car companies in the world. The Model Y was the best selling car of last year, and it's all manufactured here in
Yep.
the US. And they're doing all this stuff that GM and Ford and all these other car companies just can't seem to get together and do. What do you mean supply over demand? That's kind of a nonsense statement. Supply cannot
Yeah.
be over demand. If supply
Yeah,
is
they're
over demand, you're producing too much.
yeah, and yeah, supply over demand. Yeah, that because people feel to realize supply and demand aren't two, mutually exclusive things, that kind of affect each other. They're basically part of the same thing.
Yeah, they're just curves, and it
Yeah.
just shows where the optimum quantity of production would be once you balance out those factors.
It actually kind of reminds me of an old video Razorfist did. I know you don't like him now, but this was back when he was really good, and he did a video on '90s comics, and people were asking the question, why are issues of '90s comics, not as valuable and expensive compared to some of the old school comics, even though they're arguably better written, of better quality, and in some circumstances they're even more rare. And the reason why, and he used a clip from something that was done by Stan Lee. It's because those old comics, of Batman and Superman issue number one, they're rare because a lot of them were confiscated and destroyed right during World War II for recycling purposes.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing: the first issues of Superman number one and Batman number one, they're not good comics. I've seen copies of them. They're not good. I mean, if I recall correctly, the first issue of Batman is literally a Shadow ripoff.
That's how Batman got started. Yep.
Yep.
He was the Shadow, and
Hmm. Well,
Superman
funny
was
thing.
not a well thought out character.
Oh yeah.
He was just too powerful.
Oh yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And like I mean, it kind of reminds me of when this one guy was criticized of being a company man because he defended DC, for not paying the original creators of Superman a lot of money, and he brought up a pretty good point though, is that you got to remember, the only reason we know Superman is worth $1 million is because of hindsight. We know it would create a vast entertainment empire that would last, for several decades. But back then, when nobody knew what he was, and you approached him and he said, "Okay, so what is this character?" Well, he's a super goody two shoes, and he always wins the day, and he always does this and that, and he always wins. A lot of people would think, yeah, that's not intriguing. That's a Gary Stew. We want an
Well,
interesting character.
yeah, I mean, they were just making pulp comics back then. There were
Yeah,
zillions of them.
yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how, because they didn't think like they made Bugs Bunny cartoons. They didn't think anyone would be watching them like a year later,
Oh yeah.
let alone a century later.
Yeah, I mean it's true. Like, if yeah, it's true. I mean, hell, if there's plenty of documentaries where they've interviewed, those elderly people, back when they were old, and they asked them, like, when they asked them, and they were like, were you guys striving out to create perfect things? What made you strive to make these perfect cartoons? And if I recall correctly, I can't remember if it was who was it? Yeah, I think it was Chuck Jones. He was once interviewed, and he was asked, how did you make all these merry melodies so good and all that? And he literally said, we weren't striving to make, we weren't striving to make the greatest cartoons ever. We were just making cartoons.
Yeah, they were just trying to be entertaining.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to make a franchise. They weren't trying to make something for the ages. They were just trying to make something people would enjoy watching.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, same thing too. I've even heard, interviews where they've said, like, why is it, like, how did you get away with so many dirty jokes, for a show that's meant for kids? And they said, well, because back then they weren't necessarily meant for kids. They were kind of meant for all audiences, That's why, it's still relatively family.
Especially if you look at the pre-code cartoons.
Yeah.
Before the Hays Code.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, look back at all of those old movies and TV shows of the 40s and 50s and see how wholesome life was then. Bullshit. They just weren't allowed to portray the way things really were because the Hays Code was just basically Victorian moralization.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hays Code. That's where the myth of unless they were planning on having a child, couples always slept in separate beds. No, they did not.
Yeah, separate twin beds. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a thing.
They couldn't even do it with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who were married in real life.
Yeah.
And they still had to be in separate beds.
Plus, I also remember, if I recall correctly,
and Wilma Flintstone had to be in 2 different beds.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, also too, Lucille Ball and Desi, I think his name, I forgot.
Desi
he was
Arnaz.
Desi Arnaz. They actually apparently had to fight the network tooth, fang, and nail to get the pregnancy plot of the first season.
Yeah.
Because Lucille Ball, if I recall correctly, she was pregnant in real life, so they figured, hey, why don't we just put that in the story? And they're like, no, you can't do that because that implies you guys have had sex, and we don't talk about sex. It doesn't occur. Babies come from storks. End of story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that funny, your childhood is ruined meme where it says Goofy has a son named Max. That means Goofy had sex. Actually, it's quite a good point that people have brought up. It's like, because, Donald and Mickey, although they have girlfriends, they don't have kids, they have girlfriends. Goofy was actually, he has a kid. Then again, if I recall correctly, Goofy was always intended to be a representative of the everyman. Like, he wasn't necessarily a stupid guy. He was meant to be the average Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if I recall correctly, with
crisis, that's a new one on me. They put crisis on everything. Either crisis or epidemic.
I mean, don't get me wrong, fun with facts. Social media has done a lot of bad for society, but then again, so has a lot of other stuff in the past.
Everything has good things, everything has bad things. And the bad things they're saying about social media, they also said about television. They said it about movies. They said it about magazines. They said it about novels. They said it about every new form of entertainment that came along. Oh, people reading novels are just sitting down reading novels all day. They're not getting exercise. They're not getting out and touching grass and seeing the sun.
Fun fact, there were many ancient Greek philosophers that think that the alphabet and the written word was the biggest sin of humanity because, it'll just mean people will write it down and they won't have to memorize it by heart. They'll just, if they forget something, they can just read it.
Yeah. That was what Socrates said.
Yep. It's the same thing it's the same thing I really wish I could go back in time and tell my teachers, when they made us when they made us learn these bullshit, overly complicated mathematical equations. And I'm like, when are we ever going to need to learn how to use this? And they're like, well, you're not always going to have a calculator by you. We have smartphones now.
Yeah.
Some people are like, well, that's not good though, because now you're not using your brain. It's like, no, we're still using our brain. It's just that now we can focus on other things and not just, okay, how do I divide 189 by 9, and having to do that weird calculator thing,
How much, I'm sorry, long division is busy work.
Yeah.
That's all it is. You're just moving numbers around and you're moving them more, It's not higher levels of thought.
Oh yeah, exactly.
The more you can automate processes like, multiplication, division, and even higher forms of mathematics. Like, just give me a lambda command in Python and I can do lambda calculus on it. It takes care of the heavy lifting. That frees up my brain to think about the higher functions, the design, the reason why I'm doing this, the actual problem solving of mathematics.
Kind of reminds me of something I heard one time one person say about algebra. Basically, when someone was talking about about how algebra is important and how you'll be using it every day in life, and one person says, but the only thing I don't like about algebra is that all it is, it's just basic math, but the equation's lying to you. It's saying 5 times x equals 10, 5x. Basically, so it's like, oh, the equation is saying you need to multiply by 5, but what you're actually supposed to do is divide 5 by 10.
Well, what you do is you cancel out. So if I have a 5x and I want x, I divide it by 5, but that means I have to divide by 5 on the other side. That's all it is. That's all algebra is.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, like basic introductory algebra, that is important, but like everything after that, like you said, it's just busy work,
Well, and it's they have you memorize all of these relations, like how to solve a quadratic equation or whatever, but they don't really break it down for you and have you figure out why that works.
Yeah. That's why I failed. That's why I failed chemistry class, and it's sad too, because I used to like chemistry. Then I took chemistry class, and then it's like, instead of actually learning about chemicals and how they interact, it's like, okay, now we got to find how many moles are in this pitcher of water and all this scientific notation. It's like, oh man. And I just gave up because I got overwhelmed. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. And I remember learning logarithms in class, and they were a complete black box. It's like, how do you solve a logarithm? Well, you look it up on the table. Okay, where do the numbers in these tables come from? What am I actually doing when I'm doing a logarithm? Yep. Well, you just solve this with a logarithm. Yeah, but what actually is a logarithm, and what am I doing, and why am I grabbing this number from a table? It was a
funny thing about chemistry box. Is that chemistry, one time, I had this old friend a long time ago. I haven't spoken to him in years, but I once told him about my high school life and my least favorite subject, and I told him about chemistry. It just so happened, his in-laws were visiting that one time, and I told him, the work I had to do in my chemistry class, and his father-in-law is a biochemist that works for a medical company, and he told it to his father-in-law, and his father-in-law was like, they were teaching you that in an intro to chemistry class? When I was a kid, that stuff was reserved for AP class, like kids that actually wanted to learn the math behind. When I was in school, basic chemistry was just that. You mix chemicals and they tell you how and why they interact. The mathy stuff was saved for people that were like, I like chemicals, I want to work with them as a career.
Yeah, statistics is useless too, because you look at most statistics problems in textbooks, at least on a high school level, and basically the proper statistics answer to most of those questions is not enough information.
Yeah.
And that's actually the point of statistics, is working out when you don't have enough information and what other information you need to solve the problem.
Yeah, here's the thing, that proves that when people say that statistics and math don't lie and they can solve everything, 2 words, non-computable numbers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, tell me what Chaitin's number is, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
What is the correct interpretation of the 9th Amendment? Exactly what it says. Ninth
Yeah.
Amendment says that just because we're listing rights here in the Bill of Rights, that doesn't mean you don't have other rights. That doesn't mean that those are the only rights you have. So when you hear people just snidely sneering at you like, you don't have that right because it's not in the Constitution, read the Ninth Amendment, asshole.
Well, yeah, as you demonstrate, if you actually read the Bill of Rights and all that, it's not saying you have the rights, it's saying the government can't stop it, you know?
Yeah, the government can't interfere with these rights. They're all
Yeah.
written as though the rights are already in existence.
Yeah, I believe I've mentioned this millennia times before, but I think, I think what they say about the Second Amendment is true. It needs to be rewritten. It needs to be rewritten so the part of a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, that's got to be removed, and it should just say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Ironically, they put that perfunctory clause in to stop people from making that exact same misinterpretation.
Yep.
Because the
Yeah.
militia is the armed body of the people. And if you're going to have a militia, you need people to have guns of their own and have guns in their homes and have ammunition and know how to use them and have all of the accessories and everything else.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, although it says that the National Guard's been around since since the American Revolution, if I
Lie.
recall correctly, if I recall correctly, the National Guard in its current form is actually less than 100 years old. It was actually created as an act of as a bill. Historically, the National Guard was it was the militia. It was people showing up, organizing together, and they would fight. And yeah, sometimes they would, during a time of crisis, like for instance the American Civil War, they would be federalized. But yeah, it was individual militias. The idea of the National Guard basically being a standing army for the state government, that wasn't created until I think like the 90s. I think no, not the 90s, the 1910s or something.
Alden, the thing that makes economics in school BS is the same thing that makes economics everywhere else BS. It's the assumption that just because you can set up an equation and examine the relationship between different factors in the economy, then that therefore means you can control it by making changes to those variables. And that's always what they mean when they're talking about economics not being a hard science. Because like in physics, okay, we can change this one parameter and not worry about other stuff changing. Can't really do that in economics because people are going to react to what you do.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and that's the problem with we need revenue, so we'll just raise taxes. Well, no, because people are going to change their behavior based on the new tax rate. Things are going to be more expensive and they won't buy as much, or they will have less of a paycheck and they won't save as much, or they'll go through they'll go through more steps to try and make most of their money untaxable or whatever. They'll change what they're doing.
Kind of reminds me of something that Peter Schiff told a communist, when he was when he went to the Occupy Wall Street, and he said, "I'm with the 1%. Let's talk to me." And one person said that that it's like we have these billionaires that give all their money to their families when they could do that. I suggest that a perfect compromise should be that when someone dies, there should be a 100% inheritance tax. And Peter Schiff pointed out, if you do that, that means before I die, I'm basically going to liquidate everything and I'm just going to keep everything for myself. I'm going to shut down my company, fire everyone, and that's it, because there'll be no incentive to keep my company growing.
Or just gift it to your kids before you die.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, Donald Trump brought this up in an interview with John Stossel before he was president. He says, listen, if you raise taxes and you keep taxing the rich, here's the thing, people. The rich are never going to pay the taxes because it's not because they're evil and corrupt. It's because they have the resources to avoid them. If you raise taxes, they're going to move to a place where they don't have to pay. Even the United States,
they can hire tax attorneys who know the code inside and out and know all of the different rules of where they can put money. The whole Mar-a-Lago thing is perfect for that, because by setting things up the way he did and having Mar-a-Lago declared a club, and oh man, this is one of many things that really makes me wish all of that had been captured on video when he was on the stand with that idiot Judge Engeron on the bench. But he was just, according to all the reports, he was just schooling them all. And at one point he said, yeah, That's the whole point. Mar-a-Lago is a resort, and there's tax benefits to resorts. And the ultimate thing would be that, I mean, you could sell that. That's a whole selling point that we've already done this. If he sold Mar-a-Lago, he could sell it for $1 billion because someone's going to buy it and only pay, you know, whatever it was, 20 million or whatever in taxes because it's a resort. And he said the ultimate thing would be, it would just be a private club with one member.
Yeah.
And that's what you do. And he just schooled them all on how the tax system works.
Yeah, I've actually heard, another interesting thing about, avoiding paying taxes. That's one of the reasons why it's not as common now, but there used to be a common practice where every time a major business decision was being made, they would always have a cruise that would go across the Atlantic Ocean. And the reason was because they would wait until the boat was in international waters and then they would sign the deal so they wouldn't have to pay certain taxes or comply with certain rules or regulations because it was done in international waters. So therefore it doesn't count. It wasn't made in America, so it doesn't have to comply with that.
Yeah, it just has to comply with international law.
Yeah. Like, fun fact, that's why when people say, I mean, look at the 1950s and 60s, we had an income corporate tax rate of about 70 or 80%, and we were prospering, but the thing is, and maybe people pointed this out, nobody was paying that close amount.
Right. That's why you had corporate cars, corporate planes, and you stayed in corporate apartments. You didn't have any of those things. That's all the companies. So that didn't come out of your paycheck. And so you weren't paid that much. And so you didn't pay the taxes on it. You just drove a company car.
Some libertarians have said a monarchy would be more effective at protecting liberty than a republic. Any thoughts? Not really.
You would just be too subject to the whims of the monarch.
And, I know there's a lot of people that say, well, monarchs would have an incentive to protect their kingdom because they're going to give it to their kids anyway. It's like, that didn't stop the French, what was it, Louis something, I can't remember, Louis the umpteenth name, the guy who was overthrown in the French Revolution, he bankrupted France.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, and here's an old saying we have. Even if you have a king who is kind, he's good, he's non-corruptible, he can't be corrupted, he's a good, noble, goody-goody two-shoe, the fact of the matter is, he's still human, he's not going to be there forever, he's going to disappear, and there's no guarantee that the guy, that his successor is going to be as good and honorable as he was.
Yep.
And another thing, too, and we see this in economics all the time, is listen, just because, you're a good, honest person doesn't mean you're always going to make the right decisions. I will confess, one thing I kind of think that I find cringy in libertarians, and not going to lie, Shane, even you're guilty of this sometimes, but I'm guilty of it too, is that we always assume that, politicians are these evil, maniacal, supervillains figuring how can we oppress the people. Whereas I think 90% of the time, they genuinely care. They're just, stuck in an echo chamber, and they have that holier than thou mentality that they can't realize, well, this will be great, it'll do all this, and they just can't comprehend, actually, no, it's not the best decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you're wondering why it is that so many politicians and everyone else think that, oh, conservatives are just these, evil, racist, fascists, and why can they think there's so many of them in the country? It's because they don't think there's so many in the country because they hardly know anyone. They live in these heavily Democrat areas, with heavily liberal areas. They're rich, they're well off. They don't consider themselves to be well off because everyone's well off, so they consider themselves just to be average because they're the average of where they live. And everyone around them has these opinions, and so anyone who is outside of that just must be some sort of weirdo.
That's also the reason too why why many acts of charity seemingly work to help the poor in poor nations of Africa, but in the United States they backfire and can actually produce the exact opposite effect. And someone pointed this out. It's because, listen, the people who are poor in Africa, they are poor for completely different reasons compared to why people are poor in America.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that a lot of, I know it's controversial to bring up, but it is a valid thing, and I have seen this confirmed. I'm not saying they deserve it, but some people are poor and homeless because of their own faults. A lot of them, have untreated mental health issues. Some of them are drug addicts. whereas the poor people in Africa, they're poor because they live in oppressive kleptocrats that take away their money, and they're literally legally not allowed to get themselves out of it.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, and we've got looking back up, 3D printing from SKM of metal will be a true nail in the coffin for gun control. And look at how
I mean,
freaked out they are, because the whole excuse for basically a century for all of this gun control was the evil gun manufacturers, and it was totally different way back, in the revolution when everyone made their own guns. Well, now that everyone's getting to where they can make their own guns with 3D printing, it's like, oh my God, it's ghost guns. We have to ban those.
yeah. And going back to what you said about the Ninth Amendment, that's another thing people need to remember. How do we interpret the Constitution? Now, we don't have to go with original intent or original. We just, as you said, the way we're supposed to interpret is read them as they were understood at the time. Now, some people would say, then that means that the Second Amendment only applies to muskets because that's the only weapons the founders understand. No, it says arms. Basically means any weapon.
Well, they had cannons. They had bigger armaments.
Yeah, they had cannons. They had grenades. In fact, if I recall correctly, there was actually
how many centuries had siege weapons been a thing?
Yeah. Oh yeah, and here's the thing, repeating weapons did exist back in those days. They were extremely rare, and almost no army used them, but people were aware of them.
Well, no, people used them, but they were much better for hunting. They weren't good at all for combat. The muskets were still much more effective in combat.
Oh yeah. That's another funny thing too. That's another thing too. I hate when people say, well, the AR-15 is a weapon of war. It doesn't belong on a battlefield. Yet nobody would reject you owning an old British brown breast rifle when that was a weapon of war. It is not ideal for hunting. It's got a smooth bore. It's not very accurate. It doesn't have really good sights. But that's not the point. It's not meant to be a hunting weapon that you hunt deer with, although you could if you wanted to. It's meant to be quick to reload, and so it can be easily fired in a line, as gun combat was back in those days.
Well, and going back to whatever year it was, 36 or 38 or something like that, the whole reason the Supreme Court allowed the Gun Control Act from then was that, oh, well, you see, these aren't weapons of war, sawed-off shotguns and things like that. And the Second Amendment only applies to weapons of war because they're for a well-regulated militia. And now they're saying the exact opposite. That's how you know these people do not mean what they're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's another good example, Schism. Yeah, bolt-action rifles. A lot of bolt-action rifles, a lot of those bolt-action rifles, like Mausers, Lee Enfields, if you actually look at them compared to, like, a hunting rifle, they would make, although you can hunt with them with modifications on their own, they would make terrible hunting weapons because they don't have the features that hunting weapons had, and that's because, they were not designed for hunting. They were designed for taking on a battle, taking into a battle.
AR-15s are actually a lot better at hunting when you're talking about small game.
Oh, yeah.
And pest control and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
You got feral hogs coming in to tear up your farm. You want an AR-15.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, because you don't even need a 3D print. You don't even really need a 3D printer to make your own machine gun. It just made it easier. There's a little gun, called the Sten gun, and that was the biggest middle finger to gun control since its inception.
I mean, look, if you know how there is nothing stopping you from just grabbing some hunks of metal and making a fully automatic AK-47 out of it. You just got to know how to do it. There's a skill issue there, but it's actually not that much. Just a few $1,000s of machinist equipment is all you need.
Fun fact, Mikhail Kalashnikov, in an interview, he said that was the whole point of the AK-47. Like, so many people were saying, why did you make this gun so simple like this and all that? And he flat out said, because I meant it to be, the people/workers gun. It's meant to be a rifle that, should the Soviet Union ever be invaded again, like it was by Germany, the workers would have a weapon that they could mass produce, en masse, and hand out and readily train them right away.
Well, and that's also true of a lot of German and Italian weapons.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the same kind of major, industrial manufacturing that America had. And so they had to make their guns with different specifications and with different techniques, but you could do
Yeah.
it. It's just being able to machine it and being able to have the industrial process mass produce it was a big thing because Congress was interested in, I forget what, like this was like 1802 or something like that. I think it was during the Jefferson administration. Congress was interested in this guy who had made these repeating rifles that could shoot like 20 bullets without, well, you just reload it with a magazine. Everything they said that didn't count for the Second Amendment. And the only reason the deal didn't go through is, first of all, they were too expensive. And second of all, they're like, oh, well, we need this many thousands of them in this amount of time. And the guy was just like, there's no way we can make them that fast.
Yep. Yeah, gun control shows and everything. It's one thing I love. It's another thing too. I love doing when I bring up, gun control and people talk about Australia and mass shootings. Is people always say it's like, well, ever since we passed those rules after Port Arthur, we almost never have any mass shootings anymore. And I'm like, okay, let me take a look at before Port Arthur. Hey, you know what's funny? You guys didn't have those insane gun control laws before Port Arthur, and I'm not seeing a lot of mass shootings either.
I've done this several times before. I have to
Yeah.
keep updating it because years go by. But if you look at the number of years since the Port Arthur massacre, and then you look at all of the massacres and how many there were per year and how many people died and how many were injured, and then you do the same thing for the same number of years before Port Arthur, they're about the same. In fact, they might be a little bit bigger after.
I mean, John Stossel did a similar thing with OSHA. People are like, "Oh, but look at OSHA. Thanks to OSHA, we don't work in these smelly, overcrowded factories. The manager doesn't lock us in, and all that. And look at how many industrial accidents were going down." And then John Stossel did something that no one else was doing. He's like, "Okay, let's look at the years before." And sure enough, decades prior to OSHA, work-related accidents were going down.
Yeah, at the same rate, same slope to the graph.
Yeah.
Because people were just starting at OSHA. And then like, okay, now look at the line since OSHA and it's going down. And Stossel was like, okay, let's look before.
Yeah. And here's another thing too that I kind of hate it when people talk about, the Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Ages. They always talk about how, oh yeah, these people worked long hours in these steaming hot factories and all this stuff. And part of me wants to say, yeah, but here's the thing: they didn't have reliable air conditioning back then, and some of those chemicals that, yeah, we know are extremely toxic and must be handled with care. They didn't know that back then. Can we really fault people just for not fully understanding something? It's just presentism. We compare,
Yeah.
we compare the 1870s to what we have now, but we got to remember, it's like, and yeah, it's horrible and it sucks that, people work 12, 15-hour shifts, back in the 1870s, but you got to remember, back in those days, you kind of didn't have a choice.
That's exactly my thing, SKM. Why don't the surrounding states have higher? Because it's like, well, there's all this gun control in California. Why is the gun homicide so high? Well, they're getting it from Nevada. Well, then why isn't it higher in Nevada?
Yeah, exactly.
If they're getting the guns from there, then it should be higher in Nevada if it's because of the availability of the guns.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, and yeah, prohibition makes things worse.
Yep.
Yeah, and so many people ask, well, how will legalizing drugs make the crime rate go down? It's because, see, the reason why drug dealers arm themselves up and turn to violence and turn to violent gangs is they don't do it, because fuck the law. They do it because that's the only way they can reliably protect their turf.
And now they're talking about banning seed oils and yellow dye number 5.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna say that's one thing that made me palm Donald Trump is that he made RFK Jr. the Secretary of Health. It's like, why?
He was fulfilling a campaign promise. The RFK voters are a big reason he got put over the top in a lot of
True.
states.
Unfortunately, that's another thing I kind of don't like with the anti-Trump crowd. Even if they're saying stuff I agree with, is like so many people are thinking, why is Trump doing this? Is he a dictator? Is he doing this? And I'm just saying, and like I said earlier, it's like, no, he's a populist. Some of this, like a perfect example are the tariffs. A lot of people, a lot of libertarians are going, why is Trump doing that? Doesn't he know any better? It's like, well, yeah, but unfortunately, there were a lot of people that felt we should have those tariffs, and he's just trying to fulfill, what he was promising. Which I will give him kudos for.
I mean, theoretically, that's what democracy is supposed to be about. That's why we don't like it, but
I mean, that's just the sad reality. Like, yeah, most people who know about economics, they know tariffs are a bad idea, but the sad reality is that most people don't know that. It's not because they're stupid, it's just because it's a complicated issue that the average person doesn't have time to think about,
Yeah, I mean, you think like, okay, we'll put a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and people will buy from America instead of Mexico. And it's a lot more complicated to explain to them why that would actually hurt us more than it hurts Mexico.
I will say though, I like how people are celebrating the Mexican president by saying, like, look at her, she threatened to raise taxes on the tariffs on the United States, and Donald Trump back down. That's good. And I'm like, no, the smartest and most ironic thing you should do, if you're the president of a foreign nation and Trump comes to you and says the United States is going to implement, high tariffs on you, what you should do is you should say, okay, thank you, because that's going to benefit your country more than it's going to benefit their country.
Yep. Offset the effects of the tariff is to lift the regulations in the U.S. Yeah, I mean, or do that instead of the tariffs, because the reason why they're being made in other countries is because it's cheaper for them to, because it's so expensive for them to do it here, because of the tariffs. I don't know who Jeff Holiday is.
Oh, I think I know who he's talking about. He was like a debunker of a lot of pseudoscience. He was actually the consultant that was called in for Dr. Phil when she was doing the Jilly Juice thing. The problem is that he's also a leftist, and he kind of falls for and he has TDS. So
yeah,
I hate it when you see skeptics do that. They're so good at debunking.
My thing is when they're talking about all of this horrible things about what they're going to do with the NIH and the FDA and things like that. I just ask them, okay, what do you think the new opioid guidelines should be? And the answer will tell me everything I need to know about them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not even sure what Trump's energy policy is right now, but the guy he put in charge of it is actually an executive on a company that's a nuclear startup that has this idea of a more decentralized power grid using MMRs.
Yeah.
And if you look at the website, they're talking about like between 5 and 15 megawatts. So you could serve like, a hospital, a business park, or things like that, and not be dependent on everything all around. It's these cute little things. It's just a 2,000 square foot A-frame. It looks like a nice little cottage somewhere, and that's all you need for those tiny reactors.
It's another ironic policy about Trump. When this goes back to U.S. aid, is that a lot of people are saying that it's going to hurt, our international foreign policy, and and this is one thing I brought up before, like I've seen some YouTubers like Jake Bro saying, how are we going to help our allies, with the whole Russo-Ukrainian war, and I was pointing out, to him, it's like, dude, the funny irony is that you should be thanking him for US aid, because a lot of that aid that was supposed to go to Ukraine wasn't going to Ukraine. That was the whole controversy with US aid, is that a lot of the stuff they said it was going to wasn't going there. People are like, well, what about, those starving children that are in Africa that are helped by US aid? hardly any of that money was going to them.
Yep.
Yeah, it was going to friends, you know.
I'll tell
Yeah,
you
it's
how
like
I described what they were doing with like those hundreds of billions of dollars they sent to Ukraine. It's kind of like because they were sending like old stuff that was near its, nearing its shelf life, the end of its shelf life. And Zelensky doesn't care about that. He's going to use them and then lose them. But they would do that and use the money to replenish them. And it's kind of like if you've got this old beat up truck and it is just on its last wheels, it's going to fall apart any second. And the charity says, hey, we could use that. And it's like, well, no, you couldn't. It's not going to last much longer. And they say, yeah, but we only need it to take one load 20 miles. Okay, well, here, then I'll donate this rust bucket to you. And then you can take your load somewhere and then, junk it for the metal value.
yeah.
And then you replace that truck with a $100,000 Chevy Silverado. And then you put it down as though you donated $100,000 to the charity. Because
yeah,
that was the replacement value of what you donated to them, even though it wasn't.
Yeah. But yeah,
that's the Ukraine scam right there.
Well, and yeah, you know, so that's all those people that are saying, you know, without U.S. aid, you know, what's going to help, countries and all that rely on U.S. aid to help their problems. It's like it's barely going to helping them, you know. So, I mean, you brought that up, with a lot
most of it's just a money laundering racket.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
like,
why.
What was
yeah,
that
that's
one? It was like one senator, and like his wife was on the board of this charity that worked with this other charity that got USAID money. And so the USAID money was actually sent to that organization, which was actually sent over to that LLC that, his wife basically was. It was his wife.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And then so they
I mean,
got the money.
It's not just with USAID, you know, they tell, that's the reason why every time you feel like donating to a charity, do your research and ask questions. Ask, if I give you $50, how is my $50 going to be used, like if there's a Save the Babies Foundation, how is my $50 going to help save the babies? Because that's the problem, and why there's so many charities like that is because many charities, will spend all this money, on lavish, parties and all that to celebrate the money they raised, that hardly any of the money goes there.
Yeah, and
I think so.
It's like the more popular ones and the more you get everywhere, like the I forget what it's called, but it's the breast cancer charity. I think that's the Pink Ribbon.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently that's a whole con. Very, very little of the money they get actually goes to breast cancer research.
Oh yeah, I've actually seen like interviews from
Susan J. Corman, something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, like I've seen interviews with actual people that have suffered from cancer. They say that a lot of them, they hate, a lot of those cancer awareness groups, because they feel like they don't do anything and they turn the disease into a commodity rather than like an actual issue that needs to be raised awareness for.
Yeah. Awareness doesn't actually do all that much. You need research and development.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I've actually heard that's actually another problem that people have with like breast cancer awareness month. It's not that, we hate women or, haha titties. It's because, and I've actually heard this from actual doctors saying, it literally takes away, focus from other cancers. Because, yeah, breast cancer is terrible, but so's prostate, neurological, pancreatic, other cancers. And every time it's breast cancer awareness month, people don't talk about those, and people don't donate their money, and they don't get research and development.
Oh, pancreatic cancer is a huge killer, so is colon cancer. You could save so much more lives by focusing on those than you could by focusing on breast cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, men and women, because they both get them.
Oh yeah.
Even if you just looked at women, you could probably save more women from pancreatic cancer than you could breast cancer.
Oh yeah, I've actually remember reading somewhere that apparently breast cancer, it's actually more dangerous when it occurs in men than it does with women.
Well, because in men it's technically a lymph node.
Yeah.
And you get cancer in the lymph nodes, and it's over.
Yep. Yeah, that's why lymphoma is such a nasty illness. Yeah, I've heard horror stories about lymphoma. A lot of people don't talk about that. And the thing with lymphoma, and I've actually heard people say this about lymphoma. The problem with lymphoma is that even if you're treated and you're declared you're in remission and you're cancer free, because it's your lymph node, the treatment they have to do to help you, it's going to permanently damage your immune system. So you are going to suffer long-term permanent health consequences. Whereas with some cancers, if you get it right away and you get the proper treatment, yeah, you can move on with your life. Not with lymphoma.
I'm sorry, no, the
Yeah,
high speed rail, that's another boondoggle. That's more money laundering.
yeah.
Because
Yeah,
they
Schism
spend all
says,
these billions and billions and billions without actually building anything.
oh yeah.
I mean, if they were laying
Escape.
down some rails and then going, oh, we ran out of money, that would be one thing. Have they laid down a single mile of rail?
Yeah, Schism says pain can is one of the worst cancers you can get. I mean, I've never had cancer, but I've heard it's also the most painful cancer.
Yeah, pancreatic cancer, yeah.
Yeah. Like fun fact, when Patrick Swayze was diagnosed with it, he was criticized because in many interviews, he was still smoking and all that, and people were saying, "Why are you smoking, even though you have pancreatic cancer?" And apparently, he said, "Listen, I spoke to my doctor. It's terminal. There is nothing they can do, and I am in so much pain, and the cigarettes help me, so that's why I keep smoking." You know, like I agree, smoking probably caused it, but it is one of those things where at that point, why bother? If you are
Yeah.
told from your medical professor that there is nothing more they can do, there's nothing more you can do, that cancer is going to kill you, and nothing you can say or do is going to change that, why bother,
No, sorry, Chicken Strangler. I do not buy that. Kilo v New London. Look it up. They can take it if they want to. That's bullshit. The Little Pink House. Look it up.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, how easily is Elon making all those tunnels around Vegas?
Yeah. What's another funny thing about high-speed rails is that many people go, it's like, but look at, Japan and all that. They've got these high-speed railways, ignoring the fact that, one, Japan and South Korea have different, have different, structurally built up. Their cities are built a little bit differently than ours. And two, many of those trains, they were privately built.
New York subway was privately built.
Oh yeah, it was privately built, and then unfortunately the government took over, and now it's a hellhole.
It killed Perfect Blue and White Fang. It also killed Steve Jobs. Didn't it kill Douglas Henning? I think that was pancreatic cancer. You know, the magician from the 70s? He is the one credited for making it a little more mainstream, because before then, magicians were pretty much always, the guys in the top hats and the big fancy tuxedos. The reason why is that back when those magic tricks were developed, that's what the audience wore, so that's what the magician wore. Douglas Henning comes along and he looks like a hippie. He's got the long hair and the mustache and he's wearing the tie-dye stuff.
Yeah.
And that kind of started the trend of just, whatever your audience wears, that's what you're going to wear. Most of the rail on the East Coast was laid down by Western Union.
Yeah, I'll just talk about cancer that I mentioned earlier. My dog's getting up there with ages, and we're taking him to the vet tomorrow to do a quality of life inspection on him. And as sad as it is, I've actually brought this up with my coworkers at the dog daycare. It's one way we treat, our pets better, better than we treat people. Is that if your dog is not looking so hot, so you take it to the vet and they tell you, oh, I'm afraid he has hip dysplasia and well-advanced cancer, he's 15 years old, there's nothing we can do for him. What do? We have them humanely euthanized, so they don't suffer anymore. What do we do when grandma or grandpa reaches that stage? We take them to the hospital and hook them up to machines.
Yeah. But then when you do start to allow euthanasia, you have the crap they're doing in Canada and the UK,
Oh yeah,
euthanizing perfectly healthy people.
yeah. Like that's the thing too, like because people are like, well, I thought you guys were pro euthanasia. Yeah, if the person wants to die, if the person openly they through sound mind says, listen, I am in a lot of pain. I can't, I'm going to die anyway. I just want to end this right now, get it over with. I've got all my affairs in order. Yes, we should do that. But you know, but to be fair, yeah, there is that problem of, well, what if the person falls unconscious? What do we do then? Although to be fair, we can already kind of euthanize people in comas. It all depends on the family. Like if they're told, your loved one's in a vegetative state, they're probably never going to wake up. Do you want to remove the feeding tube, and end it? It's up to them then.
Yeah, well, that's just starving them to death.
Yeah.
They can die from negligence. They just can't die humanely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frodo's 15. He's got his vet appointment next month, and
Yeah.
he's doing okay. But I mean, he's an old dog, and I think his eyes are starting to go. I think it's really only like when he comes in from outside, comes from bright to not so bright. But he's like walking into walls and things because I think his eyes just can't adjust, or maybe he's got some sort of macular degeneration or something.
Yeah, well, your dog's a Chihuahua mix, and they last forever. So I'm not the biggest fan of Chihuahuas, but I do give them credit where credit is due. If you're one of those people where it's like every time you lose a pet, your heart breaks and you're super depressed, well, with Chihuahua, if you're a Chihuahua owner, it's like it's going to happen on a less frequent basis because those things live forever.
They usually say 18, but they can live longer.
Oh yeah, if I recall correctly, the oldest dog that's still alive to this day is a Chihuahua. He's 25 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, and according to his owner, they've asked.
Keep in mind when they give those figures, that's just the ones they can prove. Because the ones like Frodo who are rescues, we have no idea what day he was born on. We can't prove how old he is.
I mean, to be fair, one of the reasons why dogs, don't live so long and they rarely live, past 15 years old is partially our fault because we artificially bred them and kept their genetic diversity, low. I mean, a perfectly good example is look at cats. Cats, while there are some genetically manipulated breeds, cats for the most part just, they reproduced on their own and they tend to live longer, healthier lives than the average dog does.
Yeah. Usually a mixed breed will live longer, but it depends on the breeds.
Oh yeah, it's dog breeding. Like don't get me wrong, I love, I've worked with a lot of them and I love bulldogs because of how funny they are, but I would personally never own one. And I do agree with those people that say like we need to bring them back to the way they used to look because the way they look now, they are sick and unhealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, back in the old days when they were first bred, they actually were bigger. They had longer snouts, so they didn't have breathing issues. But now it's like for some reason it's like we got to take that dog and we got to smash the face in with a hammer, otherwise it's not cute.
Well, that's same thing with pugs. They were breeding them for looks, and people were using them less and less for work dogs. They were just being bred to look. Chihuahuas are not good for anything. They are useless. They're only that way because people think they look cute. And the thing is, when you have a dog breed that's meant to actually do stuff, you need them to be healthy. I mean, if we actually had a free market where anyone who wanted to could, Billy Bob's MRI scanner, you just go around places and doing that, and you could just do it without having to get a referral or anything. They'd be a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the reason why MRIs are expensive and they take hours and all that. It's because it's not a free market and there's not enough technology to go into that, Whereas X-rays, hell, now, they literally go by like the flick of a second,
Oh yeah, doctors have X-rays in their own office. You need an X-ray. You're not doing a referral and sending them everywhere. You just send them down the hall.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, the prep time for the X-ray takes longer than the X-ray itself. Like, they're like, okay, let's get this leaded thing on you. Let's do this, that, answer these questions, this, that, and that. Okay, get ready for the X-ray. X-ray. Okay, it's done. You're good.
Yeah. Well, it's just taking a picture.
Yeah. And of course, there's a conspiracy theorist saying, well, I don't get it. If X-rays are so safe, then why does the doctor go behind that screen when he does it? Well, here's the thing: you're only going to be exposed to the X radiation for like 10 seconds. He's going to be doing that every day.
That's the thing about radiation. It's all about
Yeah.
TDS, time, distance, shielding. So you're not getting it for that much time. And you do have the lead apron, so you are getting a bit of shielding as well. But there's just so much of this. The time is not a thing that they can do. They're going to be around X-rays a lot. So they need to do distance and shielding. They need to run into that other little room where they're further away and they're shielded from it.
Mm.
That's what surviving radiation is all about. TDS, time, distance, shielding.
And some people are so afraid. Some people are so afraid of X-rays because of that. It's like, I've heard some horror stories about MRIs though.
MRIs are only a problem if you have something magnetic.
Yeah.
Other than that, they're not an issue. But man, if you've got anything that's even remotely ferromagnetic, even near the MRI machine, they turn that thing on and it just gets sucked right into it.
Oh yeah, I've read some horror stories. I read one horror story about a woman who was getting an MRI for her headache, because she had chronic migraine and she just wanted to get an updated, and she forgot to take off her earrings, and she survived, but let's just say it was messy.
I mean, they should have made sure that she took them off.
Yeah.
But I mean, people who have pins in their skulls or whatever, you got to be careful about that.
Yep. I mean, don't they have like non-magnetic machines for scanning people that have like metal pins inside permanently in their body? Or
yeah, you can do a CT scan, or you go the other way and you have the pins be titanium or something else that's not ferromagnetic.
Yeah,
yes,
like
take
a metal
out your metal butt plug before you get your MRI.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. Like I've seen, firefighters and doctors, do those Q&As, and people ask, and people ask, like, how common is it for people to come into the ER and say, yeah, so I was taking a shower and I slipped and now something's inside my butt. How often does that happen? And they said, believe it or not, it happens a lot more often than you realize.
Does it happen, or is it people just saying that's what happened?
Oh yeah, that's people saying that what happened,
Yeah.
To be fair though, like there was one guy who did like this one thing where he responded to a guy that had something in his rectum, and he actually was in the shower. So honestly, I think in that circumstance he could be telling the truth, because I've had a few close calls in the shower.
I think you would be able to tell the difference though. I think there would be a pretty big difference in kind.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
If it's a butt plug that's like perfectly nestled in there, nah.
Yeah. Yeah, the funny thing is, like, so many people, like, they're like, all the stories they come up with, like, to explain how it got in there. Like, I get it, it's embarrassing. Like, I don't want to say I've ever gone through it, but if I was in a similar situation and I was embarrassed, I wouldn't come up with like this complicated story. I would just say, look, don't ask how it got in there, just get it out. To be fair, really, that's all you got to say to the doctors. They're not going to judge you or question you, because they see stupid people do stuff all the time. I've actually heard from some firefighters and EMTs say that's actually one of the harder parts of the job too, is having to put on a fake smile and help someone who, let's be honest, for the sake of humanity, you probably shouldn't help them and they should just be left to rot.
Yeah, but that's not. You need to have it where they help everyone. They can't be judging like who's deserving of help and who isn't.
Well, I know that. I'm just saying that's the hardest part of the job is, putting through that, because there's tons of people out there, like, that are frequent flyers, or they just do, or they just do such some of the stupidest stuff in the world, and and part of you just want to say, you know what, forget it. He's a lost cause. He's going to do something stupid again, but they do it anyway because of the oath they took.
That's the principle. You got to stick by the principle, because as soon as you start making exceptions, this is what I'm seeing with the thing they're talking about with food stamps now. Because they're saying, like, well, why are people, able to buy Twinkies with food stamps? And it's like, what they have now with food stamps is actually pretty objective. As long as it's not heated, you can buy it with food stamps. As soon as you say, we're only going to allow food stamps for healthy foods and not for unhealthy foods, oh man, you just watch what the lobbyists do next.
Yeah.
They're all going to be lobbying to have their food, be declared to be the healthiest, and it is not going to resemble anything sane.
And let's be real here, people. Another reason why a lot of poor people tend to not eat the best, it's not just because the healthy food is too expensive. It's also because sometimes some of that food, requires, preparation and tools that they just simply don't have. Like I've literally talked to people that said when they were growing up, they literally either had fast food or cold stuff because they literally could not afford to fix their oven, and it was broken for many years and they just couldn't afford to replace it.
Do you support a 4-day work week? Well, I mean, you'd make 4/5 of the money. That's just what you got to expect. Oh, I'm expecting much higher regulation on food products with RFK in there.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And the funny thing is that now the funny thing about food products is, I think we mentioned this last podcast, is now the biggest problem isn't that it's too expensive, it's because the government keeps recalling it.
Yeah.
They found one, and the funny thing is that some of them are even stupid. Like, it's not even for, like, it's like, oh, there's listeria here and the kumquats. It's more of, oh, this product's been recalled because it wasn't properly labeled.
Yeah, they didn't say butter contains milk.
Yeah.
Sweet cream butter. You didn't tell them it contains milk.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong.
I've been thinking about one thing, though. Let me just kind of throw this out there. Because we know that one effect of inflation is not just the price going up. It's actually making the product out of cheaper stuff. And what I'm seeing now is, whether it's, frozen pizzas or like the TV dinners or just regular stuff you get off the shelf, like, someone said beefaroni, which is delicious, by the way. But, what you're seeing with a lot of those is less protein and more carbs. Because, my chronic pain works a lot better when I get more protein in my diet. That's getting harder because they're putting in a lot of the cheaper ingredients, which are carbs, and less of the proteins, less of the meats.
Do you support a sugar tax or higher government regulation on food products? Absolutely not.
But that that would be a problem, because most of the stuff we're getting now is going to be higher in carbs and low in protein. And I really think a lot of our health problems in this country are because people aren't getting enough protein. Now, the chip bags have always been half empty, and that's so they don't get crushed during shipping.
Yeah,
that's always been.
Plus, also, if I recall correctly, some chips, like, the company will actually put, like, I don't know how true it is, but they'll actually put, like, nitrogen in there to replace most of the oxygen. And the idea is that without the oxygen, certain types of microbes can't flourish properly, so that keeps them fresher.
Yeah, they don't get stale, and the carbs don't break down into starches and things like that.
Yeah.
That's why they can stay fresh on the shelf for so long, because nitrogen is pretty inert.
Oh, yeah. That's another thing. That's
But
another
that's
thing
why
too. I
also
hate
as
it.
soon as you open it, it starts to go bad because now there's
Yeah,
oxygen and CO2 in there, and that can cause
yeah.
problems.
That's another thing too. I hate with people is they're like, is like, oh, look at the preservatives. We got to stop putting preservatives in our food. It's like, yeah, how dare they make it so our food, will actually last longer.
Yeah. What is this about seafood mislabeling? Because seafood is about the only thing I found that's reliable.
Mm.
You want high protein, you got to stick with seafood.
I think
Even
I
the
think
stuff like we're on the package that says high protein, the protein shock, high protein, and you look on the back and it's got like 3 times the amount of carbs as it has proteins.
Yeah.
Yeah, fiber would be better too, but I'm still thinking because there's this really dangerous myth from the vegetarian set that you don't need protein in your diet. None of the essential nutrients are proteins. That's true because they're talking about the essential nutrients with cellular function. They're not looking at things like the operations that happens between cells or things that happen neurologically or whatever, things that are very highly dependent on proteins.
Honestly, that explains why a lot of vegans slash vegetarians always seem to feel like they're having issues. And so many people are saying, no, you're just looking at because some of the more radical vocal ones. It's like, no, I've talked to ex-vegetarians, ex-vegans, and asked them, and they've said, yeah, when I took the vegan diet, one thing I noticed was I was depressed all the freaking time, and I do not have a history of depression.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Or a
yeah,
lot of
there's just
like the ones that are like full on, vegan for life, and they start to go blind because their optic nerve degenerates.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That's why I kind of hate. That's why I always feel nervous when I see like those vegan couples and they're having a baby because it's like, listen, you're adults. You can choose what you put into your body, but that baby needs to eat. That baby needs proteins. They need fat and all that. And if you're gonna go on to, we're gonna give them a vegan diet.
Yeah.
Also, you know what I would like to tell some of those vegan moms? Well, then by your own logic, you can't breastfeed your instant. What? But mother's milk is perfect. Yeah, but you're an animal. It's coming from an animal, so therefore breast milk is an animal product.
It is an animal product.
Yeah. Also, what about all those single cell animals, you kill when you drink a glass of water? What did those poor paramecium do to you?
How dare you kill those amoeba?
Yeah. Hang on, my mom's calling me.
Yeah, right. Before the pandemic, chicken thighs were $2.50, but now it's $4 to $4.50. Yeah, I mean that's about right for the level of inflation we experienced. Oh yeah, I think I do remember that one. That was a while ago.
That's why I hated that one episode of House MD where House, has a vegan couple and their babies, clearly sick, and when they say they're vegan, then they feed her a vegan diet, and House is in the wrong for judging them that it was their vegan diet that hurt, and it's like, oh no, it wasn't their vegan diet, it was a thyroid condition. I actually saw a couple of people in the comments of that clip say, there's a possibility that them putting her on a vegan diet is the reason why her thyroid was failing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be right back.
Oh no, Chicken Strangler. She's just on her way home. She wanted to know. She wanted to know, what the dinner plans were.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah. Yes, I
Inflation
know.
hurts the
I'm
poor
30.
middle class too. It actually hurts the poor middle class worse than it does anyone else.
Yeah. And yes, I know, Chicken Strangler. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I still live with my mom. I'm sorry. I can't help that it's so expensive, and I have autism, which kind of makes it difficult for me to do that.
No, I was just gonna drink out of the fridge.
Hmm. How do you think states can reduce shoplifting? Well, I mean, I do think some of that is a little bit over exaggerated, but I do think the number one thing that, like, I see this a lot is, it's not that we need more police, it's that we need to stop persecuting people for defending their property.
Well, the thing is with shoplifting, the stores have gotten to where they can't do anything. At my wife's store,
Oh
they see
yeah,
someone, running out the door with stuff. They can say, "Hey, stop," and that's it.
yeah.
Oh, we were driving
I'm
near
like,
Walmart, and
I'm
my
like,
wife
I'm
all of a
sorry.
sudden got really pissed off because there was this lady who's supposedly this homeless lady was selling flowers for $1 each to all the cars that came by. She starts yelling her. I'm like, "What's the matter?" She was like, "She stole those flowers from our store." Because, the
Yeah,
flowers, they have it, it's right, in front of the door. She just walked in, grabbed a whole bunch of flowers, went out the door with them before anyone could stop her. And then she's
yeah.
over
I
there like,
just
"Oh, I'm homeless. Buy these flowers from me."
Well, and I mean, even if you are genuinely homeless and struggling, I mean, I'm sorry, but you're only hurting others by shoplifting. Also
She
something I
ain't
really hate. And
homeless.
yeah, there's a high probability she isn't too. Yeah. But going back to what I said, another thing too, and I hate it because I've seen this one YouTube lawyer do this, where he's one of those YouTube lawyers where it's like, who's responsible or who's legal. And one time he responded to a guy who was fighting, who was fighting against a shoplifter, and he says, "Well, yes, shoplifting is illegal. That's officially assault, and you can't do that." And not gonna lie, I'm kind of one of those people that believe that there should be a philosophy in place that says, if you are trespassing on a property and you're clearly there with ill intention, you forfeit any right to say, "Hey, this guy assaulted me." Nope, you don't. You lose that.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, he can't beat the crap out of you and then curb stomp you even after you've surrendered and said, "Please don't hurt me. I'm sorry, I surrender." But yeah, if you go there with the intention of stealing, if he grabs like that candy bar you're stealing and he breaks your arm, you forfeit the right to say, "Oh, you hurt me."
"Oh, but no, it's
Like
just
some
a property crime. You should just let him take it."
Oh
That
yeah, or the
pisses me
classic,
off when people say that.
or the classic. Why are you willing to shoot someone just because they stole a candy bar? It's like, people, it builds up, you know. Like, yeah, in the short term, stealing, shoplifting one or two candy bars isn't gonna do much, but in the grand scheme of things, it builds up. Oh yeah, and of course it's always fun when they always bring. Well, that's why stores have shoplifter insurance. Who frickin' pays for that insurance? In fact, that's the second reason why healthcare in America is so expensive. The main reason is government compliance, but the second reason it's so expensive is literally because it's easy to sue doctors in America. Yeah, doctors get freaking sued all the time, even for bullshit reasons. That's actually one of the reasons why they often will do tests that aren't needed. It's not because they're gouging you; it's because they're scared, that they may miss something, and then you're going to turn around and sue them.
Yeah, it's the liability and medical malpractice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, John Stossel did that in a really old video with the trouble of lawyers. That's the reason why if your wife's in labor and unfortunately there's a complication in the pregnancy, so she needs a C-section, if while they're operating her they accidentally cut the bladder or something, even though the delivery team is perfectly capable of repairing her, they're going to postpone the operation once they get the baby out, and instead of closing her up and fixing her, they're going to put her under more anesthetic, and then they're going to contact a urologist and say, "Hey, we accidentally lacerated the bladder here. We need you to consultate for us." And the reason they do that is because they're afraid of being sued. They're afraid of the husband turning around and saying, "Hey, why did you try to operate on my wife? You're just an OBGYN. You're not a urologist. You could have seriously hurt her." When fixing the
And a
bladder is a
lot of
very
it
simple.
is like, why are you doing that surgery in your office instead of a hospital? And the North Carolina Supreme Court has said they're really, really looking to check that, because there's this one eye doctor in New Bern that wants to do cataract surgery in his office, and he said he can do it for like a fourth of the price or something is doing it from the hospital. But the statement of need laws say you have to do that in the hospital. And the North Carolina Supreme Court was like, yeah, figure that out, send it up to us because we want to look at that. So hopefully that'll change for the better.
Oh yeah, that's another thing too. Not all surgeries need to be done in a sterile, hospital environment with specialized equipment. I have seen doctors that have said, some of the surgeries we could easily do. Like a perfectly good example was there was one doctor that John Stossel interviewed where he does more of like small time stuff. Like he doesn't do major procedures, he does small stuff, and he even does minor things like like surgical removal of objects that get stuck in your skin, and he does it straight in his office, and he charges less. Like like he says, like if you get a fishing hook stuck in your hand while fishing, you don't necessarily need to go to the hospital and be put in a sterile environment. All you need is just some sterilized tool and some preventive antibiotics, and you should generally be good to go.
I'm just searching around a couple of websites, but it looks like they're all saying that the amount of the sale price that is that is a grocery store recovering shoplifting, recovering the losses from shoplifting, is about 0.5%. That doesn't sound like much until you consider that their typical profit margin is only 1%. Yep. So they're losing like a third to a half of their profit margin in shoplifting.
Yep.
And of course, that's going to affect, what they pay their people and how many services they can offer their customers and everything else.
Yep. All this shoplifting stuff though only brings up my point. Like, you always see these philosophical debates about, why is evil bad and why is good good. I know the reason why. It's because evil is economically unsustainable.
Yep. You're just pushing costs onto third parties, and there's no way to sustain that.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to tell those raiders in Fallout 4. They're always talking about how it's like we'll have this big fortress and we can raid however we want and no one's going to stop us. I'm going to ask them, okay, what happens when you run out of people? When all the people you raid from are dead or they move far away so you can't get them? What are you going to do now?
And when you've already raided all the stuff that there is to raid and there's no more being produced, then what?
Yeah, you guys are not farmers. You guys are psychopathic killers and thugs that just take whatever you want. You're going to starve to death eventually.
It doesn't even make any sense anymore, because what is it supposed to be, like 600 years after the nukes fell or something like that?
200.
Oh, 200? Still!
Yeah.
It wouldn't even be like that 50 years after.
Oh yeah, that's another thing that the Fallout universe gets wrong. It's like even 200 years from now, there's many parts of the world that are just bathed in radiation and nothing can live there. When generally, if I recall correctly, even in the worst case scenario, radiation emitted by even the most powerful nukes, it goes away after a decade or two.
Yeah.
Like seriously, by Fallout's logic, Japan should be a nuclear waste zone because it was nuked twice.
But I mean, look at how Hiroshima and Nagasaki came back from it.
Yeah. Yeah, and people are like, oh, well, that's because Fat Man and Little Boy were tiny. No, they were pretty powerful bombs, People fail to realize Fat Man and Little Boy weren't the first atomic bombs invented. They were just the ones that were approved for warfare.
Well, and the thing is, and this is why they stopped doing that, but when you had that race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, making bigger and bigger nukes, 10 megatons, 50 megatons, 100 megatons. Most of what you're doing with a bigger nuke is destroying the stuff that already got destroyed and just destroying it even more. So, if you got 0.5 megaton, it'll destroy a certain area. A megaton will destroy a bigger area, but not twice the area. It'll just make that same area more destroyed and then destroy a little more as well.
Yeah. I mean, a perfectly good example is Tsar Bomba. Like, that was like the most powerful nuclear device ever made, and it had 50 megatons of TNT and all that. And there were fears, and for many years, there were fears that the Soviets had a whole bunch of them. And then later, when the Cold War era failed, one of the scientists that worked on it had a confession. He said, yeah, by the way, that Tsar Bomba We only made one of it. We never mass produced it. It was too
I
impractical.
think they made two. There was like 150 megaton that I think was the one they test detonated, and then the other one I think was 100 megatons. And then they realized there's no point in this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I think like several of the scientists who defected to the United States later said, yeah, by the way, the Tsar Bomba, we didn't mass produce it. It was basically Khrushchev's way of saying, hey, look, you capitalist pigs, I've got a bigger bomb than you.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the reasons why, even though on paper Russia, the Soviet Union was doing all these incredible stuffs, especially with the space program, they were actually falling behind because they were literally just saying, come on, we got to get there first. We got to get there first. There was actually a good YouTube series which actually exposed the Soviet space program, and the fact of the matter is, a lot of those Soviet space programs, they were horrible to go through. Like, they were literally sending up cosmonauts with barely any training and machines that barely worked, and they were told, yeah, go to stars for the motherland, comrade.
Yeah, and like people were talking about, oh, they beat us up there with Sputnik, but the only reason they beat us with Sputnik is because the U.S. was wanting to launch a satellite that actually did something, and all Sputnik did was go beep.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, you can tune into your radio and listen to the beeps from Sputnik. Oh no, the Russians have beeps. They beat us because there were beeps, and that's all it did. It just beeped.
Yeah, it's like comrade scientist, what does the Sputnik do? Well, you see, chairman of the people of the Soviet Union, when you turn onto a certain frequency, it goes beep, beep, beepity, beep, beep. Is that all it does? Well, sometimes in certain hemispheres, it goes beep, beepity, boop, boop.
Yeah, just beeps.
And they were just like, screw it, we gotta beat those Americans, get it in the atmosphere. Whereas the satellite we launched into outer space actually did something. Yeah, another good example about how messed up the Soviet space program was the famous dog Laika, the space dog. People always say, "Oh yeah, it's just too bad she died. She died because her thing malfunctioned." That was actually a miracle that happened, because had it not malfunctioned, she would have died a slow, painful death from thirst. Because, no joke, and many members that worked on it programmed, there was no plans to get Laika back. There was no plans to bring her back. All they cared about is, we got to get them into space, and can they survive the radiation? Okay, good. Move on.
Well, I think they said that in all probability, she died on ascent and didn't even make it to space.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason why the U.S. took so long, to get a live animal in outer space is not because, because of all this bureaucracy or because Americans are slow or greedy. It's literally because, well, we don't just want to make sure that they live. We want to make sure we can get them back.
Yeah.
Because to be fair, that is something you should think about. Because, like, are you going to send a man into outer space and tell him, oh yeah, once you're in outer space, there's no way for you to get back?
Well, that's why I think Eisenhower and then later Kennedy, when they were talking about sending astronauts into orbit, sending astronauts to the moon, they always said, and bring them back alive.
Yeah.
They always said that. They always emphasized that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I've actually heard, and I've heard this from people that actually grew up in the Soviet Union, and like, now granted, they weren't alive when that happened because this was back in the 50s, but I've asked them, like, did your parents or anything know about Sputnik? And from what I understand, while Sputnik's launch was celebrated in places like Moscow, for the rest of the Soviet Union, most people didn't even know about it. Yeah. Either because A, they didn't have TVs or radios unless they didn't know about the news, or two, if they did know, it was one of more of those things like, okay, so what? Is that going to make our bread line go by faster?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Soviet Union, they launched a satellite into space, yet they didn't have mass production of toilet paper until the 1960s. No joke.
That was one of the Yakov Smirnoff jokes when he was talking about going back to the Soviet Union and buying toilet paper. And he says, "How much is toilet paper?" And he says, "Toilet paper is $2." So he hands him $2, and the guy hands him 2 little squares of toilet paper. And he was like, "I could have just used the $2."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the stuff you have to take in U.S. college, not just your electives, but all your liberal arts classes and everything. Yeah, that's a boondoggle too.
Mm.
College education has become another grift.
Oh yeah. You know what's really sad, because I dropped out of college. Is like, because that I've been doing a lot of research, is that when you really look about it, for most of human history, you did not need to go to college, even for complicated jobs that we think about today. For the most part, historically speaking, college was only for if you either wanted to be a doctor, two, a lawyer, or three, you wanted to be a priest. That's basically what it was: law, priesthood, and medicine. Everything else, you just got an apprenticeship, or you were self-taught.
I mean, a huge number of programmers never went to college at all.
Yeah.
They're like, "No, you need to go to college to learn coding and learn computer science and everything." No, you don't.
Yeah. And another problem too I have with college is that you got to pay for it. And I'm sorry, like apparently it's supposed to be like it's supposed to teach you specific skills. Then why the hell does it take 4 years?
Yeah.
Like, I've seen some people say it's like 4 years to teach a person how to build a car. I could teach a person like that in less than 6 weeks.
4 years with that many hours is enough to make someone an expert.
Yeah. And that's
But
another
no,
thing
they
too. From what
just
I've
have
been,
you do so much busy work.
that's another thing too that I've heard about college is like the reason why it takes 4 years and why it's all this because a lot of the stuff they do, it's busy work. When you sign up, for engineering courses and all that, you're not just taking like engineering skills. They're teaching you like the principles of engineering, the mathematics of engineering, and all that. And it's like, listen, just teach me the stuff that I'm gonna need if I want to be an engineer. Like, I understand. Yeah, I got to learn math and all that, and not to mention too, some of the stuff they make you teach. You already learned that stuff in high school.
Well, and I've talked to all sorts of people. Like, there was one I remember specifically, the guy was talking about just how useless it's become. And that you're talking about like even a great engineering college like North Carolina State University. That's supposed to be one of the greatest ones. You get a 5-year education there. And you get the master's in engineering. And for the you have all these graduates coming in wanting a job. And in the interview, it'd say, okay, you'd hand him a breadboard, some components and a schematic and said, wire this. And he's like, it's a really simple board. And they couldn't wire it. And he explained it to me. I was like, man, I could have done that when I was a teenager.
Yep.
It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
And that's what tech companies are finding out. They find out that it's basically useless to ask them the question. Like, the idea is, oh, we're just trying to make them think like, why our manhole cover is round, or other things like that, where they're not really caring if you get the right answer. They just want to see how you think. That's pretty much useless. Ask them to do something practical.
Yeah.
Ask them to do something they'll actually be required to do on the job.
And that's
Something
another myth.
Just show you have the skills.
Yeah, that's another myth too, is that we see with college. Is like they say, if you don't go to college, you're going to spend the rest of your life working at McDonald's or in a warehouse, and you're going to be miserable and all that. It's like, yeah, you do graduate college, and you do end up graduating from college, and you get a job at an office clerk and desk, and you're absolutely miserable. I think I saw a comedy like that one time where showed
making that. you're not making as much money as you would have at McDonald's when you figure in the student loans you're paying off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw a skit like that one time. There was a guy working in a warehouse and he says, "I hate this job. I really should have went to why didn't I go to college?" And then in the next panel it shows a guy being overworked, and he's in one of those office cubicles, and he's clearly overworked, and he's thinking, I I spent $100,000 in 5 years of my life for this. Why did I go to
Well,
college again?
even in like a STEM field or something practical like that, you basically have to get a PhD and do that level of work in order to be able to make more, but after your student loans and everything, to be able to make enough to make it worthwhile.
Oh, that's a funny quote by Frank Zappa. If you want to get laid, go to college. If you want an education, go to the library.
Zappa was great.
Oh yeah. Yep, he is absolute proof that, contrary to popular belief, you don't need to be a left-wing debaucher, hedonist, drug addict to be a good musician.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing that shocked a lot of people too, and I've actually heard that's actually the reason why he got banned from SNL. It's not because he was bad or anything. It's because they thought it's like, oh yeah, Frank Zappa, he sticks it to the man. He does all this stuff. He'll be perfect, and then they get there and they find out he's really not that interesting at all. He's just a regular guy who just really likes playing music.
Well, and I remember like when he and I think it was Gene Simmons and maybe Ozzy Osbourne, when Tipper Gore, dragged them all in to testify in front of that Senate committee about devil worshiping and everything. It's like,
oh, I know what you're talking about. It wasn't.
You'd be
Lee Snyder.
Oh, Lee Snyder.
Lee Snyder of Twisted Sister.
What was saying like, you'd be surprised. We're just ordinary guys, and we go to church every Sunday at very ordinary mainstream churches.
Yeah.
Actually, I think more than one of them said it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, they brought in Frank Zappa, D. Snyder, and John Denver, I think, and everyone was shocked, and they were shocked because they thought that John Denver, being a country boy, he would be a patriot and support the U.S. government. Frank Zappa would be a drug hippie, and that D. Snyder, because he was of Twisted Sister, which was a glam metal band, he'd be crazy. But actually, they were really well professional. And yeah, like you said, when D. Snyder was talking to Tipper Gore about how there's all these demonic sexual stuff in there. That's not in my music. I can assure you. If you're looking for it, then you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, show
I agree.
me the lyrics. Where is it in the lyrics?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, people, but like, if you're claiming that, and it's the same thing with the SJWs. If you're going around saying, oh, everything is a microaggression, or everything is a satanic message, or everything is is sexual, I think that says a lot more about you than it does about the performer.
Yeah. It's like all of the people who insisted that the words to Louie Louie were, dirty and sexual and everything, and they aren't a bit of it. Yeah. It's just that the Kingstons, which is actually the second cover, I think, that was made of it.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
It was just such a low quality recording. It was hard to understand everything, and people were just hearing what they wanted to hear.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing a documentary about that, about songs like that, and they mentioned that, and apparently in the original raw demo, if you listen carefully, you can actually hear one of the players go, "Oh fuck!" And the reason why he said that was because they were having recording issues, and they just couldn't be bothered to edit it out. Yeah. It's only in like the raw demo version though, and the newer ones, it's removed, but you gotta listen for it. But yeah, he says that.
But it was like the whole thing was like the FBI spent years and all these millions of dollars or whatever it was trying to figure out what the words were. And they were like, they could have just asked us.
Yeah.
Or you could have like gone to the copyright office, and because they were filed with the copyright office, or just listen to the original, which you can understand perfectly. But no, they were hiring all these like audio engineers to try and, bring out so they could understand everything, and all these linguistic experts to see what the patterns were. Oh man, it was crazy.
Yeah. It's also similar to like when there is like explicit, explicit contact within a song, but people take it out of context. Like they'll hear hear a song like, that's about drugs, and like, oh, your song is promoting drug use, and the band's like, no, if you pay attention to the lyrics and listen to the tone and context I'm singing, it's clearly an anti-drug song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, they're projecting their own mental and psychological issues.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that will do it for this one. Anyone got any parting shots you want to get out?
No,
Any
I'm
last
good.
minute things you want to say?
No.
I'll give the chat a second to catch up with that. But yeah, I'll just go ahead and start the sign off and get any last minute chats as they come in. So thank you all for watching again. Remember, if you want to participate in the audio portion, it's just on Discord. So you just got to become a supporter at any level, and that'll get you access to the super secret Discord voice chat where you can come in and join us. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for everyone who donated. And until next time, stay strong and be free.